Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fleet Success Show with lots of hosts this time. We're opening this up for a full panel discussion of pretty much every host we have here at the Fleet Success Show. Are we missing anybody that is normally on the show? I think this is it. So full house today. First time we've ever done this. Really cool. Yeah. I'm excited.
Me too.
And we've got a topic.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah. This gets turned into a madhouse really quickly. But joining me on the call today, I've got in studio Marc Canton.
Hey, everybody.
Remotely, I've got Tony.
Hello.
How are you doing, Tony? And coming down, the infamous Steve.
Good to see you.
Who I swear does like the best Dennis Hopper impression when he puts on set.
And he gets like grimace going? Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then joining us from the lovely state of Florida, Nathan. How you doing out there?
Good, you?
And just a little to the north, Facundo.
Hey, is Dennis Hopper still alive? I don't even know.
I don't know. That sounds like a pop quiz question.
Yeah, right.
Easy Rider. Yep.
Well, somebody had to get that reference, right? All right. So today we wanted to do a fun little episode where normally you come in, you bring us onto an episode, a podcast, and we all agree.
Right.
Like just whatever the topic is, we usually find something that we agree on or agree.
Right.
And as we were chatting this past week, we realized like we have some very strong opinions about this particular subject. And we thought it'd be awesome to get everybody on here and just rumble a little bit.
Yeah.
So to tee this up for everybody, a conversation we're having is around work found during a PM, right? So you're doing the PM inspection, and during the PM, you find a defect, right? Which if you talk to anybody on our team, I think we all agree on this piece, which is the whole point of a PM is not the oil change, it's the inspection, right? It's to find things wrong and fix it while it's in the shop versus having to bring it back in and schedule it for later, right? So with that set, the question comes up is that work, is that planned maintenance or is that unplanned maintenance, right? Like the whole point is to find it and fix it instead of it being, like an unscheduled downtime repair, which is the most expensive repair we have, right? And we know, Steve, based on, I can't remember the name, starts with a G.
Gieslin's inverse.
Yeah, Gieslin's inverse square law, right? That if we can find it during a PM, that it's infinitely more cheaper than if we let it go out on the road and it causes, catastrophic damage.
Right.
And there's just, it's infinite, it's a square and it goes up very quickly. So with that said, is PM work, is work found during a PM, is that planned or unplanned? And how does that affect my ratios? So I'm going to drop that little hornet's nest. Steve, it sounds like you want to go right first. All right, hit it.
Well, to me, I'm going to say I'm going to buck the system probably because I think it's planned work. And the reason I think it's planned work is because you brought it in on the PM, which is planned. And now you can take care of it without having the vehicle be down on the road. That there's really kind of there's a play on words a little bit here, unplanned, unscheduled, things like that, where you're, all that kind of stuff. But the whole purpose in my mind for a preventive maintenance inspection is to find exactly that stuff, because you don't want that to fail on the road. That's where the Gieslin's theory goes awry, is if it fails out on the road. Because now you have tow trucks involved. Now you have mobile service trucks involved. You may have a driver down, which is costing you, $50 an hour, whatever they make. So,
right.
I'm 100% on Steve's corner. Sorry, Marc.
Hey, don't give away. Don't give away.
Marc, it sounds like you got out of there a little bit.
Yeah, I did.
Let's hear the opposing view. The opposing counsel.
Yeah, I actually, hold on, wait, Marc, hold on. I had Nathan and Steve's view up until yesterday, and then I was reading what Marc was saying. I was like, he's got a point, but I'll let you kick it off, Marc, and I'll give some examples of what some of the things that you said yesterday started to get me think a little bit differently as well.
Appreciate that.
Yeah,
so what I was saying yesterday is I think for, things that are discovered during the PM that are wear and tear items or normal things that one would expect, right? Okay, my brakes are worn, I got to replace the brakes, I got to, maybe change a tire and those sorts of things. Even longer term wear things, right? You have things that do wear over longer periods, right? Hey, this is, the suspension shock, we need a new shock or something like that. All of that to me is precisely what the PM is for. And I would agree that that's planned work. And generally speaking, when you think that that out, right? Like I'm going to have that part in the shop. I'm going to be ready for the potential of that kind of work that needs to be done, right? But if I get that thing up on the lift, the example I used yesterday was, hey, if we have a 4x4 half-ton pickup and I get it up on the lift and I see a mangled differential that's hanging off, right? That's not planned work in my mind, right? There's no way that my PM team could have anticipated that work, right? Yes, we found it, and that's great. But when we think about what's the point of the KPI, right? Because we, on the one hand, I pointed out, hey, we're doing a little trade-off here, right? If we call that planned work and we call that PM, it's gonna hurt our work order turn times, right? For sure. But more importantly, what are we trying to get at when we're looking at planned versus unplanned work? We're trying to get at what is the quality of the stewardship of our fleet operators, and also what does that lead to within the fleet program? In other words, is that causing us to be reactive, or is that allowing us to be proactive, right? And so in my mind, when I have that truck up on the lift and I see a differential fall off the bottom of it or something like that, I have to be reactive to that. I could not have anticipated that work. There's a decent chance I have to order a part. That's not something I'm going to have in stock. It's going to go down anyway. And I personally would, record those lines differently. I would record the PM and other normal wear and tear type stuff as part of the planned work. And I would record that kind of repair as unplanned or unscheduled work. And in all likelihood, there's a decent chance I'm going to have to schedule it out and not actually perform that work during that PM anyway.
So right? Defer it to later.
And it's going to get deferred to later.
It's a big enough job.
Correct.
What if it's a limited goal?
You probably wouldn't do that. Right. Like you wouldn't put it back on the road. You have to fix
right.
it.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to get downed anyway. Yeah.
Good. And I think that's a good point is when is that work going to be actually completed? Is it completed at that point when the vehicle's in the shop, or is it going to be completed later when you quote unquote schedule it back into the shop for repair? So I think that's an interesting thing that we have to take into consideration. And I think anything beyond that typical, and think of it as an SRT, standard repair time, anything beyond that standard repair time for that PM, I think becomes unscheduled work. It was not originally planned or scheduled.
So normally, like when I tell people to set their SRTs for PMs, and maybe this isn't accurate, but when I tell them to do it, it's set it for how long the inspection takes, right? But then if you're scheduling, you should be scheduling for, like for secondary repairs, right?
Right.
And so it's tough to, like, if you're just scheduling off of SRTs, I guess there's a gap there probably, right? Which is, here's the planned allotted time for this job. Here's how much time you should spend doing the inspection, and here's how much time should be allotted for found repairs.
Yeah, no, I actually think that's the exact right recommendation, and that's actually the point. Actually, to me, you're giving me a little fuel, because if you were doing that, I think that is the best practice. And if you were following that practice, right, you could schedule for your SRT for the inspection and any other normal things you're doing as part of that PM, the oil change and everything else, right? And you could schedule for some work that you're going to find, great changes and things of that nature.
Right.
Like, again, I'm going to lean on this example, but it's really hard to schedule for having to replace the differential. You have no idea that that's coming in. And I think in the example I used yesterday, right, it's a 1-year-old, 12,000-mile half-ton pickup. You're not expecting to do that kind of work on that kind of asset at that point in time.
Well, in the case that you gave, that's actually driver abuse, and that needs to be a direct charge back.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's no question about that. That part we don't debate on.
I think I don't ever use planned or unplanned. I use scheduled or non-scheduled. And that's why I'm defining that, I think, a little bit different, because it's when you schedule a PM, then that vehicle is down and you have a lot of time to it. Now, you may find a dozen things on that vehicle, but you still a lot of time and outside the customer's purview. Basically, they know their vehicle's not available to them because it's scheduled for maintenance at that point. And so that's why I've always said that. But I guess the point is, when you look at things statistically, data numbers, like Marc, you love data numbers. Mm-hmm. That's why you have to say, okay, so what's the point you're trying to make when you do that, right? So I guess that's where it comes in. There's root cause analyses involved, things like that. But to me, it's always scheduled or unscheduled. So I don't use that connotation, planned or unplanned. So
right.
Well, and I'll throw in too, right? Like from our history, this was a big thing for Grandpa, was always, hey, if we can get that and find it while it's in the shop, then, the way we track in our system is anything found during a PM is a PM repair, and that goes under the PM cost bucket, right? And he was always big about 50% of your operating cost of a vehicle should be driven out of the PM, right? You should find 50% of your repair cost from the PM.
Yeah.
You should spend another 15% doing the PM itself, right? Because you need to allow time for the oil changes, things like that. But I know we track it that way, which is emphasizing the PM repair, and that all goes under the same planned bucket, right? I get that. It sounds like more you're okay with that, as long as it's like an anticipated. I mean, how do you anticipate anything during a PM? That's why we inspect it, right? But there's maybe a time frame. Maybe it's an hour and a half. Maybe it's a severity.
Right.
Or it's beyond the expected lifetime of a component. Right?
Exactly.
Like, this is way short for this component. We shouldn't have to replace this now.
Exactly.
Is it anticipatable?
Right.
It might be the better way to think about that.
That's exactly how I'm thinking about it. I think that's, I think there's a line somewhere, and I think that's about where the line is. Because again, the point of the PM is, yes, it's to catch things, and it's to do normal routines. It's preventative maintenance. These are the maintenance routines we need to do to keep this thing living and running the way it should. And by the way, while it's here, we're going to inspect it to make sure there's nothing wrong anywhere else, right? So, it does depend on the nature of what was found, I think, right? Like
so it's all subjective.
I don't know. It's subjective.
Based on what you're saying, Mark, you're saying essentially, if it's something that you didn't expect to happen, like if you're pulling in for PM and the tire tread's low and you got to change the tires. You're right. That's because they wore, and it's time to change it. But you're saying in the case where the drive line's hanging down, or you got a brake pot hanging down, or something's been damaged, that was not planned because that should not have happened at that interval.
Correct. You could not reasonably expect that.
Yeah. So in that case, I don't know that I would disagree with you, whether that's planned, unplanned, scheduled, or unscheduled.
Well, that's why it sounds very subjective, case by case. Like, I would expect to come in and find problems with brakes. I would expect to find problems with hoses and with belts, right?
Right.
Wear and tear items, right? But I'm also anticipating that I'm opening the door and those hinges aren't quite right? Like, I'm purposely looking for those types of issues that through maybe this is the normal operating use of that vehicle. I expect that at some point, I don't know when, it could be this one, it could be 5 PMs from now. I know I'm going to have to do this, which that's why I inspect them every time.
Yeah.
Right?
And in fairness to your point, there's probably a lot of listeners out there like, I can anticipate that every time my police department comes in, I will have to rebuild the engine. Right.
So, change the brakes, change the tires.
So I get what you're saying, but looking at that example of the door, right? That's okay. I found this on the inspection, and now I can plan to do that work at a later date.
If it's not a safety related issue, right? Like we can schedule it for another day.
Correct.
If it falls outside the out of time, like, hey, this is going to bump all my stuff, and maybe that's it. Is this going to have an impact on the rest of the day?
Right. That's exactly it. Like, in other words, I cannot plan for this. I have to be reactive. I can't leave that differential hanging down there. I have to be reactive and now do something that's really outside of the schedule or the norm of what I would normally do for this. And I have to react to do it right now, or at least begin to do it right now, because I can't let the vehicle go bad on the road. So, and that's really what that KPI is about, I think. And that's kind of where I think the nuance falls is. So we're trying to measure, proactive versus reactive work so that we have an understanding of, what's the stewardship and also how we're anticipating these things, right?
Well, but devil's advocate, why wouldn't I just add another hour to my PM time? Right? Like, just to give myself because I don't want this to negatively impact that KPI. And this, it goes to a different question.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. KPI.
Play this card, right? Right. Why don't I just extend my PM times to cover the unexpected, right? I expect that I'm going to have an unexpected failure of some component.
Right.
Right. I don't know what it is. It could be a 10-minute job. It could be an hour-long job. Why wouldn't I just pad my time that way?
Well, wouldn't that be associated with the different levels of PM? A PMA, for instance, is really going to be a fluid change, filter change, in an inspection. You wouldn't expect necessarily a significant issue.
The inspection. Yeah, like the inspection template probably drives what you expect to find wrong.
Correct. In a progressive PMB or C, the inspection is going to be much more comprehensive. You're going to probably find a lot more. And that's why the standard repair time for a PMB or C is going to be longer than an A, for instance.
Right. Yeah, because it should be more thorough. I mean, they also, they're replacing other components and they're, just automatically
Correct.
more work, right?
Right.
But,
Absolutely.
and I would challenge listeners, look at your PM inspection templates. And if your PMA is the same inspection as your PMB and C,
Problem.
then you might be good. Right? Ethan, jump in here.
Yeah.
Save me from these yahoos.
And Facundo, too, I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I was kind of going back and leaning into what Josh was saying about the PM repair and coding those lines, because you do find it under the PM. And it's something that we used to practice quite often because it kind of lent to how effective our PM program was being. And so that's kind of where, I lean back to more what Steve was saying, where I don't really talk about the planned, unplanned. It's more the PM was scheduled. We found the repair, so it's going under scheduled because we found it during scheduled work. So that's kind of where I'm still leaning. Now, there's going to always be those one-offs like Marc's throwing out there. You're going to run into those. And there's a lot of different ways to handle it. Different work order, different schedule, plan it, whatever you got to do, right? It's just, where do we draw that line to make that cutoff, so to speak?
I actually don't think unscheduled and unplanned are synonyms.
I
think that's where we're kind of going awry a little bit here.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, tell me more. Like, how do you see those as different? Because I think there's some confusion going on about, are we talking about unplanned or unscheduled?
Because I think you can have a scheduled, after we've been talking, I think you can have a scheduled maintenance with an unplanned maintenance combined. You can use the scenario that Marc's talking about, because you've scheduled the vehicle to come in off the road so it's not impacting your customer. Now you bring it in, you're going to do your normal walk around, and then all of a sudden now you find reactively something that occurred unexpectedly that needs immediate action. That particular piece of that subsect of your scheduled repair for your PM now became an unplanned maintenance item.
Right.
Well, and I think the key here, Steve, is you're hitting it, which is when I think about, the SRTs, and the reason why, Nathan's talking about coding the line this way is that we track those separately, right? Like the labor cost for, if I find something wrong with the differential, that labor cost and the parts have to go to the differential line, right? Because I need to see that tied to the right VMRS code, right? So I can categorize and get the right analytics out of that,
right?
Right. I'm not going to put that under the PM inspection line,
right?
Which automatically means that line it didn't exist on the schedule,
right?
But it was found during a scheduled maintenance, so it may not have been planned for my day, but it's something that it's. I don't know the right way to say that.
Right.
This is what's.
But I think you're hitting on it. Like you want to record that you found it during the PM.
Right.
That you do want that.
And where I was going with this is, like, I think about the VMRS standard and I think about priorities, right? And how we, track work. And effectively we break it down into 3 areas, right? There's road calls, there's breakdowns, right? Road calls and breakdowns are pretty similar. And then you have scheduled and unscheduled work, right? But effectively, if it wasn't on the road or it's not broken down, I prevented the breakdown. That's the whole point of the PM, right? So I don't want to see that negatively impact my KPIs or my performance metrics, because we're splitting hairs here a little bit, but that I didn't expect to find that issue, but the PM did its job, right? And it found it before it turned into a bigger issue. I found it before it was a road call or breakdown.
Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of the reason that I brought up the whole conversation. This whole thing started a few years ago. Those round tables that they do at the end of GFX where they hand you a topic and you go sit at the table. So I think it was PMs. So we started talking about it, and somebody said something about, well, any PM that we do, anything that we find, like wiper blades or brakes that you would expect to find, they're coding that as then unscheduled. And I was like, well, that is completely destroying any KPIs. Right. That, like, if you're maybe you have great PM compliance and everybody's bringing them in, like, you're killing yourself.
Right. And
so that conversation erupted after that. But that was kind of the core of the conversation, which is, and I always kind of see things as, if you guys read some of those blogs that I do, like I relate other things to fleet, right? So like I'm sitting here across the street, I can see this medical building down the street. So if you go in there for a routine checkup and they're like, dude, you need triple bypass right now, you can't leave. Like, what are you going to code that under? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is that considered? So that's kind of gets me. And that's what was the example that, Marc, when you said that yesterday, I was like, if I go in for a doctor's appointment, they tell me I need a triple bypass. Is that scheduled or unscheduled work? Or how am I thinking about that, right? Because it's all of a sudden, like, they didn't expect, somebody of my age and relatively good health to be like, what's up, dude? You know?
Right.
Yeah, but you found it during a routine health check.
Exactly.
And that's the point. So I think we're really establishing, hey, that is the point. It is to check for that. It is to catch the just in case. It is to prevent, if you don't catch it, then you don't have that bypass, and then, the result is not good. But certainly the execution of that bypass, it's hard to say that was scheduled or planned in my mind, right? In that particular case, right? So
it's almost like a reasonable buffer within the time, right? It's like if you go in there for a PM and you're like, okay, anything that you can, like, all right, we complete all PMs by noon, but they have to be done by 5 for it to be considered a PM or something. Is anything outside of that?
Right.
Yeah, or something. So anything, because you're telling the department, we're going to have your car for the day. Okay, cool. You expect to do that. Anything other than that, then we start to talk about it a little bit differently, I guess.
Okay, so now you're pulling back a little bit different of an angle, right? Which is not necessarily, does it impact the rest of my, like my daily schedule? Because I can shift things or move things around, right? Does it impact the availability of that unit?
Exactly, yeah.
It hasn't affected the availability of the unit, more than what we've already planned for.
Right.
But if it carries over to another day, well, now that's actually impacting our availability. We've got to talk about spare ratio, things like that, right?
Yeah, it's all those feeder KPIs, right?
But I think it does hit, though, is, bringing it in, there is a ripple effect of if I did not plan for the full day initially, right? Like I probably, maybe I had 2 or 3 vehicles in my PM bay that day. What am I doing with the other 2?
Yeah, they're affecting their availability, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So at some point, you're going to hit the availability metric.
Right.
Which is why this is the godfather.
Exactly. If you haven't heard that.
So I mean, I guess, if as long as you're using a good fleet management information system and you're using work order line items, you can cover this very well. I mean, you have a PM on one line, you find all the different repairs, you note those on subsequent lines on the work order, and on those lines you could put unplanned, right? I don't know that I've ever actually tracked unplanned versus planned. I've always tracked, like Nate said, scheduled versus unscheduled. But this takes that data to maybe a whole deeper level, right?
Yeah.
And so you can really kind of drill down into that data if you're doing it this way using the line items of the work order.
Right. And I want to bring that back. So hold that thought, Steve, because that dovetails perfectly into bringing back to something you talked about, which is, well, what about buffering the PMs, right? So a few thoughts on that. I actually think, you should reasonably, again, buffer the PM to anticipate what are realistic things that are going to pop up often. And then to Steve's point, by tracking the data in the way that I'm suggesting, you now have the data by which to base upon, hey, 40% of the time, PD comes in and I have the differential hanging off. I'm beating up. I'm sorry for my police friends out there. I love you, but
60% of the time it works.
Yeah. Right. But the point is now you have the data to do that accurately and reasonably, right? And of course you don't want to and I know you're not suggesting this for the sake of our listeners, bear with me. Josh is not saying go out and put 10 hours on your SRTs for your PM. You will undermine everything. You'll create the most inefficient workforce you've ever had in your life, right? That's not what he meant by that. But I think reasonably doing that, for things that you can anticipate you might have to work on, I think that's really.
Well, and an SRT is pretty subjective for the most part anyway.
Right.
I mean, a lot of that comes from, warranty repairs that dealers put together or manufacturers, and they don't anticipate that it's a bolt stripped and you got to, go in there and retap it and things like that. That's why flat rate has ranges. Right. That's why we use SRT ranges from 90% of the actual time to 110%. Right. So I think a lot of that is already kind of factored in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it follows.
So then that means, though, right, like I'm thinking about as I'm adding these work order repair lines, and we track the repair type and the cause code separately, right? That's, VMRS standard. Those are 2 separate fields.
Right.
For us, it sounds like I'd be tracking my repair type as a PM repair, right? But then my cause code could be, like this is, it's driver abuse, not case damage, and something like that, part warranty failure, something like that.
Exactly.
But it sounds like there's almost like just a nuance here of, this is still a PM repair, but it was an unscheduled PM repair.
Right.
And maybe you have a separate repair type for, this is, what we kind of call planned scheduled repairs and unplanned, unscheduled repairs. I'm just going to cover all my bases and some good words. And it, it's not clear to our listeners, right? We don't know what we're talking about sometimes.
So when we get to this detail, this is going to be a world-class fleet operation. So all those of you that are just onto this, you're probably just, the fact you're scheduled and unscheduled, you're probably good at this point.
Yes, that's a good point, Steve. Yeah, we're really trying to drive home like this is up here.
Well, and for 90% of the fleets that are just struggling to keep their head above water, right? This is so far downstream. If you could just get to like just tracking that you have PMs and you found something during a PM, I'd say that's great. And then step 2 would be getting to this nuance and figuring out, okay, well, did I anticipate that this was something that should have failed in the first 60,000 miles of operating this unit differential? Or, you're right, is this something that was just completely out of left field and I had no idea that this coming, right? This alien showed up on the lawn.
Yep.
So,
well, and something you guys aren't bringing up. Sorry, Mark, but something to think about is if we're using a paperless shop, we're now relying on the technicians to start coding this stuff.
Oh, they're master coders.
I'm just saying.
Exactly what I was going to say. Imagine the riots that are going to break out when it's like the fleet manager.
One more thing to do.
Here's what we're going to do. And it's
amazing thing on this podcast. Mark Canton says.
Yeah. And then the technician that's been there for 35 years is going to be like, man, get out of here.
Do you like right through Mark under the bus?
Yeah, I love it.
All Mark's fault.
Well, Nate, now be careful, though, because we only have room for one topic per podcast here, and I know where you're going with that. It's the whole comeback thing and trusting mechanics to mark comebacks. That's a whole other can of worms.
Yep, true story on that, too. So, all right, guys. Well, it sounds like we've all gotten our opinions out there. We still like each other at the end of the day. Any last parting thoughts before we wrap up? No,
I have one thought.
Okay.
Thanks, Facundo. Well, I just wanted to say thanks to Facundo for stirring it up. I think it's a great conversation, and it's nice that, if you're like us, you're a fleet geek, right? I'm a fleet geek. If that's not clear, boy, right? And it's fun. It's fun to think this stuff through and think about, hey, what's really the best way to do this? How do we drive efficiency? How do we drive quality? And that's what this is all about, right?
Well, and now I'm really curious if there's anything else we disagree on.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty.
Yeah, like whether it's soccer or football.
Oh,
hey, I'm good for both. Hey, look, I got it right here. You see that?
Yeah.
You see it right there? So as long as they're playing it, I don't care what they're calling it.
That's fair. I think indirect versus direct was one of the topics that came out.
Yeah,
we might have some fun on that one.
Yep.
We won't get into politics on this podcast because that's just not what we do. We're going to come up with some fun ones.
We'll do some. Yep.
Well, Josh, we had a little bit of conversation earlier today about the best barbecue, and there was the discussion about Kansas City barbecue versus Texas barbecue, and then Facundo dropped in a complete
North Carolina barbecue.
No, it's not even in the conversation.
I've had barbecue in all 50 states. So
Oh, I got one. I've got one from a little further south for you. Somebody told me to bring. Yeah, somebody told me to bring a knife, and I was like, it's like a sword. I don't think the TSA is going to like that very much.
So we are, I think, though, during Spirit Week, we're going to have to put this to rest. Yeah, maybe we'll do some Kansas City. We'll do some.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Facundo and I already and talks about how we're going to do Argentinian.
Oh man, it's the best, man. Mixing Italian cuisine with South American cuisine.
I mean, I've had Brazilian barbecue. Good too.
Oh yeah, I can't forget the Brazilian.
Similar, but we're better.
Of course.
No falas português, pal.
Okay, no Portuguese on the call.
Well, guys, I'm going to officially say we've jumped the shark. Ready to wrap.
All right.
We're all going to sign off. Thank you guys very much, and keep the signage set up.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Thanks.